It doesn't start with shouting. It doesn't begin with bruises or cruel insults. It starts in silence with the subtle feeling that something isn't quite right, but you can't explain what. You're in a conversation that feels more like a test. You find yourself second-guessing your reactions, your choices, your very memory. One day you're laughing. The next, you're apologizing for things you didn't even do. It's like waking up in a room where the furniture shifts every night, but you're the only one who notices. They smile while you shrink. They comfort while you collapse. And they always leave just enough warmth for you to stay. This is how it begins. Not with a storm, but with a breeze that slowly erodes your sense of self. The narcissist doesn't demand control with fists or fire. They do it with suggestion, with timing, with knowing just which wound to press until you confuse their pressure for presence. What they want isn't love. What they want is ownership, emotional access. Mental real estate. They don't want to share life with you. They want to inhabit you, to make your reactions, your fears, your hopes all orbit around their gravitational pull. Carl Jung once said that everything we deny in ourselves becomes a part of our shadow. And the narcissist is often someone who has denied so much of their inner chaos that they must control everything outside to avoid confronting what's within. They project their disowned parts onto you. Their insecurity becomes your neediness. Their rage becomes your overreaction. Their emptiness becomes your lack of love. And you, unaware of this dark dance, try harder to fix something that was never broken in you but deeply broken in them. Control doesn't always come in chains. Sometimes it comes wrapped in concern, in sweetness, in an apology that arrives just in time to make you doubt your instincts again. That's the illusion. That's the trap. You believe you're still free until one day you realize you haven't made a decision without looking over your shoulder in months. You're not weak. You're not naive. You're human. And humans stay in cages they don't even know they're in, until they see it for what it is, not love, not care, but control in disguise. They don't come with a warning label. You meet them, and they seem magnetic, too good, even. They listen with an intensity that feels rare. They say exactly what you've always wanted to hear. You think, finally, someone who gets me. But you don't realize that what they're offering isn't understanding, it's strategy. Love bombing is what they call it, the flood of affection, attention, validation that makes you feel like the center of the universe. But it's not love, it's bait. And once you're hooked, the script flips. Suddenly, you're being gaslit, made to doubt your memory, your logic, your sanity. You bring up something they said, and they swear they never said it. You try to express a feeling, and they say you're being dramatic. And when you begin to pull away, the guilt arrives like a wave. After all I've done for you, they whisper. Or worse, they go silent, cold, vanishing without a trace, teaching you that your silence must be earned back through submission, that love is conditional, that their attention is something to fight for. And slowly, you begin to believe it. This is the playbook, one written not in ink, but in patterns. Charm, then confusion, affection, then distance, praise, then punishment. It's never consistent, and that's the point. You become addicted to their highs because the lows are so deep. You begin to chase the version of them they showed you at the beginning, the version that never really existed. And while you're chasing, they're collecting your time, your energy, your identity. Because narcissists don't seek partners, they seek reflections. They want to see themselves, worshipped and unquestioned, in your eyes. Jung spoke of the unconscious games we play when we are disconnected from our inner truth. The narcissist is a master of these games. Their behaviors are not designed to love you, they're designed to disarm you, to confuse clarity, to replace your voice with their echo. And the most tragic part is, it works not because you are weak, but because you are kind, empathetic, hopeful. You want to believe that people can change, but the truth is, someone who feeds on your confusion is never hungry for your love, they're hungry for your surrender. And if you feel exhausted, it's because you've been in a war you didn't know you were fighting, a war that wasn't yours to begin with. But now, you see the pattern. Now, you know the playbook. And once you see it, you can never unsee it again. You don't stay because you're weak. You stay because something deep inside you recognizes something familiar in them. It's not love, it's memory. An echo from a time when love was confusing, conditional, unpredictable. Maybe it was a parent who only smiled when you performed, a caregiver who only praised you when you were quiet, helpful, good. Somewhere along the way, you learned that love had to be earned, that peace was fragile, that to be safe, you had to abandon little pieces of yourself. Carl Jung once spoke of repetition compulsion, the unconscious drive to return to old wounds, hoping that this time the ending will be different. So you enter a dynamic that mirrors your earliest emotional blueprint. You think, if I can just make this work, I'll finally feel whole. But the truth is, the narcissist isn't your second chance. They're the repetition, and that's why it hurts. Because your soul is not just mourning their cruelty, it's mourning every time you weren't seen, heard, or valued as a child, every time your worth felt negotiable. And they feel it. They sense that hunger in you, not for them, but for redemption. They know exactly how to feed that craving with just enough kindness to keep you tethered. They exploit your deepest needs, to be chosen, to be believed, to be worthy, not because they want to meet those needs, but because they want to control them. And when you try to leave, it isn't just them you're walking away from, it's your old story, the one that says, if I try harder, I'll finally be loved. That's why it's so hard to go, because leaving feels like failure. But it isn't, it's evolution. It's the moment you stop trying to win love from those who only give it when they benefit. The narcissist is a mirror of everything you were taught to tolerate. And once you see that clearly, you begin to understand this isn't about fixing them, it's about freeing yourself. You don't have to keep reenacting the same pain. You can choose something else. You can choose you. There comes a point when silence stops being self-protection and starts becoming self-erasure. You swallow the words, the truth, the ache in your chest when something feels wrong, but you say nothing. You convince yourself it's not the right time, that maybe you're overreacting, that peace is more important than conflict. So you keep the waters calm, you keep the peace. But what you don't realize is that while you're protecting the surface, something underneath is cracking. Because every time you silence your truth to avoid upsetting someone else, you chip away at your own foundation. You smile when you want to cry. You nod when everything in you says no. You pretend it's fine when it's not. And over time, you stop recognizing yourself. You wake up exhausted, not just physically but spiritually, as if your soul is carrying the weight of words unspoken, boundaries uncrossed, and feelings unacknowledged. That exhaustion isn't laziness. It's the cost of constantly abandoning your truth for someone else's comfort. Carl Jung said that the soul becomes fractured when we deny its truth. And silence, when used to preserve someone else's illusion, becomes a form of self-betrayal. You think you're avoiding conflict, but what you're really doing is trading your voice for their approval. And that kind of peace isn't peace at all, it's a prison. The bars are invisible, but the sentence is real. You don't fight, but you lose. You don't scream, but you suffocate. But there is a moment, a turning point, when your silence becomes louder than any argument could ever be, when you realize that keeping the peace outside has created a war within, that the cost of not being too much is becoming far too little, and that's when it hits you. The cost of peace is too high if it demands your silence, because true peace doesn't come from pretending, it comes from being. So when you finally speak not with rage, but with clarity, you don't just reclaim your voice, you reclaim your life. And that moment, that sentence, that boundary, it isn't an explosion. It's a liberation. Because the first person who must hear your truth is you, and once you say it out loud, the silence no longer owns you. Words are not just sounds, they are spells. They carve worlds, collapse lies, anchor truth in places where doubt once reigned. Words create bonds, and they also break chains. When you've lived in the grip of manipulation, in the slow erosion of your own voice, you learn to underestimate language. You start to believe silence is safer. That speaking up only invites more confusion, more conflict. So you bite your tongue, you water yourself down, and you forget that words spoken with clarity are how reality resets itself. Because the truth is, it doesn't take a fight to be free, it takes a sentence. One clear, grounded, unapologetic sentence that ends the performance, that stops the cycle cold. Not because it's loud, but because it's real. Because it doesn't aim to destroy, it simply refuses to comply. This isn't about revenge. It's not about playing the same game with sharper tools. It's about stepping off the board altogether. Carl Jung believed that clarity awareness spoken aloud is how we reclaim our power from the unconscious forces that control us. And when it comes to dealing with a narcissist, power isn't in reacting, it's in naming, seeing, stating what is true without fear or fury. That is what ends the spell. Because narcissistic control thrives in unspoken dynamics, in blurry boundaries, in your hesitation to call it what it is. But when you speak one sentence of unmoved truth, the illusion begins to dissolve. You don't need an essay, you don't need an argument, you just need the courage to say what's real, and when you do, it's not a weapon, it's a boundary. A sacred, grounded line that says, I will no longer shrink to make you comfortable. I will no longer lose myself to keep this going. This sentence does not attack, it reclaims. It's the moment your voice becomes your home again. And once you speak it, you're no longer playing their game. You're writing your own rules. I see what you're doing, and I'm not playing this game. Let that sink in. Say it slowly. Not with anger, not with fear, just with the quiet certainty of someone who's finally awake. This sentence is not a threat. It's not an insult. It's a boundary. A door closing gently but firmly between you and the chaos that once lived in your space. And the beauty of it lies in its simplicity. No explanation, no debate. Just a clear refusal to participate in the dynamic that has kept you small. The first part, I see what you're doing, is about awareness. It's about pulling back the curtain. No more confusion, no more wondering if you're imagining things. It names the behavior. Not with blame, but with clarity. It says, I'm not asleep anymore. And that alone begins to strip the narcissist of their favorite tool, your doubt. The second part, and I'm not playing this game, is the refusal. The conscious decision to remove your energy from their drama. The game only works if you keep playing. If you keep reacting, defending, chasing, explaining. But when you step out of the cycle, when you stop giving them the reaction they crave, they lose control, not because you fought harder, but because you stopped feeding the fire. This sentence carries no aggression, yet it is unshakable. It doesn't seek to hurt, only to end. It's not a wall, it's a line. And behind that line is your peace, your self-respect, your grounded presence. You don't owe an outburst. You don't owe a scene. All you owe is your truth, spoken with calm finality. Carl Jung once said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. This sentence is you making the unconscious conscious, naming the pattern, refusing to be ruled by it. You're not rising to their bait. You're not explaining why you deserve to be treated with dignity. You're just stepping out of the game. And in that stillness, in that sentence, you regain something sacred, your autonomy, your clarity, your power. Because when you finally say, I see what you're doing, and I'm not playing this game, you're not just ending a conversation, you're ending a cycle, and that is how the healing begins. Narcissists don't need you to fight them. They just need you to feel deeply, erratically, endlessly. They feed off the confusion, the swirling storm of your reactions. That's the game. One moment, they provoke you. The next, they soothe. Then again, they disappear. It's not madness, it's method. Because if they can keep you spinning, doubting, chasing closure that never comes, they don't need to lift a finger. They already own your focus, your energy, your power. But this sentence, this calm, clear sentence, does something they never expect. It doesn't explode, it evaporates, like turning off the power in the middle of their performance. I see what you're doing, and I'm not playing this game. It's not dramatic, it's decisive, and that's what makes it deadly to their control. Because narcissists can handle anger, they can twist it, flip it, use it against you, but what they can't use is clarity. What they can't distort is detachment. You're no longer spinning. You're still. You're no longer arguing. You're observing. And in that shift, the entire dynamic changes. Without your emotional reaction, they lose their grip. The fog starts to lift, and the illusion they've carefully crafted begins to crumble. Not because you exposed them to the world, but because you saw through them and stopped playing along. Carl Jung taught us that what we bring to consciousness loses its power to control us. And this sentence brings everything to light. It strips away the theater, it names the pattern, it reclaims your reality. You are no longer lost in the maze. You're outside of it, watching it for what it is. Not love, not care, just control disguised as concern. This is why it works. Because it's not a scream, it's a severing. It's not a weapon, it's a withdrawal. And in that withdrawal, you return to yourself, to a place they cannot reach, a place where your peace no longer depends on their approval. The chaos ends when you stop dancing. And the silence after that sentence? That's not fear, that's freedom. The moment the words leave your mouth, there will be a pause, a flicker, a fracture in their mask. Because they weren't expecting this, not calm, not grounded refusal. Not a sentence that doesn't beg, blame, or break down. They were prepared for a reaction, a tearful plea, an outraged scream, an explanation they could twist. But this is something else. This is a door closing and not slamming, just quietly locking. And that's when it begins. You may see rage, a sudden burst of anger that feels wildly disproportionate. Or you might get disbelief, mockery cloaked as confusion. What are you talking about? You're being dramatic. Wow, so now you're the victim? Or they may pivot. Suddenly, they're soft again, kind, nostalgic. They'll remind you of the good times. Offer apologies dipped in honey. I've been stressed. I didn't mean it like that. Let's not throw everything away. Don't be fooled. This isn't healing. It's strategy. It's their way of testing you, trying to see if your sentence was a moment of strength or your new truth. And make no mistake, the stronger your clarity, the harder they'll test it. They'll try every tactic in the playbook: manipulation, guilt, charm, silence, even shame. They'll want to pull you back into the dance, the fog, the cycle, because your refusal threatens everything they've built, not just control but identity. If you don't respond the way they expect, the mirror cracks, and they hate what they see when they're no longer being reflected through your pain. But here's what you must remember. Their reaction is not a sign that you're wrong. It's proof that you're finally right. The discomfort you see in them isn't danger, it's disruption. You're interrupting a pattern that depended on your compliance. You're dismantling a dynamic that only ever benefited them. So when they rage, soothe, or mock, stay steady. Don't escalate, don't explain. You already said the sentence. That was enough. Let it echo, let it land. Let the silence that follows speak louder than any argument ever could. Because this isn't just a sentence, it's a signal. The moment you spoke it, something shifted. The game lost its power, and you finally stepped into yours. There's a moment after the storm, when the voice has gone quiet, when their tactics shift, when the silence stretches out like an invitation or a trap, and in that moment, you might question yourself. Was I too harsh? Should I have stayed? Maybe they were right. Maybe I'm the problem. This is where the real work begins, not in walking away, but in staying anchored. Not in resisting them, but in remembering you. Carl Jung called it individuation, the process of becoming whole by meeting your shadow face to face. The parts of you you've buried, the wounds you've tiptoed around, the truth you were once too afraid to speak. Walking away from control isn't just self-preservation, it's soul work. It's the sacred act of stepping back into your own center after living too long on someone else's axis. And it doesn't happen in a flash. It happens in whispers, in reminders, in moments when doubt creeps in and you have to return, again and again, to the truth you already know. They were never going to change. You were always enough. You just finally stopped apologizing for seeing clearly. That's the integration. Not forgetting what happened, but understanding why it kept happening and choosing not to live in that loop anymore. Because truth doesn't always feel comfortable, sometimes it burns. But it's yours, and every time they try to destabilize you with guilt, charm, or silence, you return to that inner knowing. You don't need to prove your worth. You don't need to convince them of your pain. You already know what's real, and that truth becomes your spine, your compass, your quiet rebellion. When you choose it again and again, you don't just survive the manipulation, you transcend it. You rise out of the pattern and become the person who no longer fits inside that story. So when the noise comes back, when the pull returns, don't fight it, don't fear it. Just return to yourself, to the clarity that sets you free, because the truth doesn't beg, it stands. And so will you. Most people think detachment means you don't care, that you've gone numb. But that's not detachment, that's disconnection. True emotional detachment is something else entirely. It's not cold. It's not distant. It's clear. It's what happens when you stop lighting yourself on fire just to keep someone else warm. It's the moment you realize your peace is worth more than their chaos. Narcissists thrive on emotional reactions. They prod, provoke, flatter, ghost-all to get you to feel. And not just feel, but feel for them. Rage, guilt, desperation, hope. As long as you're reacting, you're engaged. As long as you're explaining, defending, pleading, they have you in the palm of their hand, because your emotion is their fuel, and your chaos is their control. But what happens when you stop reacting? When the bait doesn't work? When the silence they once weaponized becomes your sanctuary instead of your sentence? That's when the power shifts. Because emotional detachment doesn't mean you don't feel it, means you no longer hand over those feelings like currency. It means you observe without absorbing. You see the game without joining it. You hear the lie, and instead of fighting it, you let it float away like smoke, because your energy is too sacred to waste on distortion. Your calm is confrontation enough. It says, I'm not available for manipulation. It says, your chaos can't reach me here, and it drives them mad. Because nothing is more unsettling to a narcissist than someone who no longer flinches, no longer chases, no longer bends. Detachment is a boundary they can't cross. Not because you're hiding, but because you're rooted. You're not fighting to be understood. You're standing in your knowing. You don't need to win. You've already won by not needing to play. Carl Jung said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And becoming that person grounded, centered, sovereign requires that you no longer hand your emotional landscape to someone who only wants to flood it. So next time they try to pull you in, pause, breathe, stay still. Let your silence say what words never could. You are not mine to fix, and I am not yours to break. It doesn't end clean. It never does. Because once you've broken the pattern, once you've stepped out of the role they cast you in, they don't just let you go. They try to reel you back ingently, urgently, manipulatively. This is what's called hoovering, like the vacuum. They'll suck the air out of your peace just to remind you they still exist. It starts with a message, hey, just thinking of you. Then maybe an apology, soft, disarming. I realize I messed up, I've changed. If that doesn't work, they'll shift tactics. A crisis appears, a sudden emergency. I really need someone to talk to, you're the only one who understands. If that fails, the guilt trip lands next. I can't believe you'd throw everything away after all we've been through. But here none of it is about you. It's about the control you took away. They're not reaching for your heart, they're reaching for your attention. For a chance to reset the cycle. Because if they can get one more reaction, one more reply, the game resumes. This is where you hold the line. You don't need to scream. You don't need to defend. You simply return to the sentence, like a sacred mantra. I see what you're doing, and I'm not playing this game. Not with anger, not with fear, with calm, with certainty. You might have to say it more than onslaught to them, but to yourself. When the loneliness creeps in, when the memory softens, when the doubt knocks, say it again. I see what you're doing, and I'm not playing this game. Because this isn't about them anymore. This is about you, your clarity, your boundary, your freedom. Every time you repeat it, it becomes less about resisting them and more about reclaiming you. And in time, they'll stop trying. Not because they've changed, but because you have. They no longer see an opening. Because now, you don't flinch, you don't fold, you don't forget. You see. And that changes everything. The sentence was the key. But now comes the door, the walls, the home you build inside yourself. Because walking away was only the first step. The real transformation begins in what you do after. In how you protect the space you just reclaimed. You see, narcissistic control doesn't just break you, it teaches you to break yourself. To say yes when you mean no. To accommodate, to perform, to abandon your own needs so someone else feels comfortable. That pattern doesn't vanish when they do. It lingers in your habits, your relationships, your inner dialogue. That's why boundaries aren't just fences, they're foundations. And now, you begin again. Start small. Emotional boundaries. It's not my job to fix how you feel. Physical boundaries. I'm not available to meet you in spaces that drain me. Digital boundaries. My phone doesn't get 24/7 access to my heart. These aren't punishments, they're declarations. They say, I matter here, I belong to myself first. Carl Jung said that what we fail to make conscious will control us. So make this conscious. Every time you say no, every time you step away from toxicity, every time you name what you need, you're reparenting the part of you that once thought boundaries were dangerous. That once believed love meant surrender. But not anymore. You teach people how to treat you by how you treat yourself. If you betray your own boundaries, others will too. If you respect them, hold them, honor them with grace and consistency, others have no choice but to follow that lead. And those who won't? They're simply not meant to remain. This is your new language, not just a sentence but a lifestyle, one where your energy is not up for negotiation, where your worth is not tied to how much you tolerate, where your peace is sacred, where you no longer have to play a role to be loved. Because now, the game is over. And in its place, you are building something real quiet, grounded, unshakable. You. When the noise dies down and the dust begins to settle, something unexpected happens. You look in the mirror and realize you're not quite sure who's looking back. After so long bending, performing, editing yourself to keep the peace, parts of you feel unfamiliar, quieter, muted. You start to wonder, what did I give up to be tolerated? What dreams did I set aside just to be enough for someone who never saw me? This is the sacred ache of awakening the grief of realizing how much of yourself you traded for approval. The smile you forced, the opinions you softened, the dreams you shelved because they made them uncomfortable. You remember who you were before the control disguised as concern, before the silence conditioned you to believe your needs were too loud, and now you begin the journey back. But this isn't about returning to who you were, it's about becoming who you are, who you've always been beneath the roles, beneath the fear. Carl Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And the truth is, you were never lost. You were just buried, under obligation, under performance, under the weight of someone else's shadow. Now, piece by piece, you reclaim your voice, your rhythm, your pace. You remember what joy feels like when it's not followed by guilt. You remember how desire sounds in your own language and not distorted to fit someone else's expectations. You start asking not, what do they need from me, but what do I need? And slowly the fog lifts. This is not a rebirth. This is a return. A sacred homecoming to the self who always knew, always weighed, always whispered from the quiet. And now, without apology, you rise, not as a version, not as a reflection, but as the original. You're not rebuilding the life they broke. You're building the life they were never meant to enter. And it begins with the moment you say, I am no longer who you tried to shape. I am who I've chosen to become. At some point, it stops. The rescuing, the explaining, the endless dance of justifying your worth to someone determined not to see it. You step off the stage and for the first time let the curtains fall. No applause, no final bow, just silence and truth. You are no longer playing. No more bending yourself into a shape that fits their narrative. No more translating your pain into language they refuse to understand. No more shrinking, smoothing, softening so they don't feel small beside your light. Because here's what no one tells you. The game only works if you agree to play. And now, you've stopped. You no longer argue with lies just to be heard. You no longer offer explanations where there's no intention to listen. You don't try to rescue someone who's drowning in a sea they refuse to admit exists. You realize that every defense you built, every plea you made, every attempt to prove yourself at all fed the illusion that their opinion held power over your truth. Not anymore. You've walked away, not with rage, but with a quiet grace. A grace so unfamiliar to them, it rattles their illusion of control. Because now, the stage is empty. The script has been burned. And they're left in the spotlight with no one left to manipulate, no one left to mirror. This is the moment the power shifts. Not because you fought harder, but because you stopped performing. And in that stillness, you reclaim the authority that was always yours. You are not an actor in their drama. You are the author of your own story. Carl Jung taught that liberation doesn't come from conquering the other, it comes from integrating the truth within. And your truth is this: you don't have to be small to be safe. You don't have to be silent to be loved. And you don't have to perform to be enough. You've exited the stage, the play is over, and now, in the quiet, you begin to hear the most powerful voice of all your own. This is what the end feels like: not a fire, not a scream, but a quiet return to yourself. No more chaos in your chest, no more walking on eggshells, waiting for the next shift in their mood. No more wondering if love is supposed to feel like this, because now, something inside you is different. Not harder, not colder, just clearer. Freedom doesn't always arrive with trumpets. Sometimes it comes in the form of stillness, of waking up and realizing that nothing in your life is asking you to shrink anymore. That the weight you've been carrying was never yours to begin with. That silence, once used to control you, now becomes your sanctuary. Choosing peace doesn't always look like a fight. Sometimes it looks like not reacting, not replying, not explaining for the 100th time. Peace is not the absence of noise, it's the presence of truth. Your truth, unapologetic, untouched, undeniably yours. And it all began with one sentence. The sentence that ended the spiral, the story, the game. Say it with me now. Slow, deliberate, powerful. I see what you're doing, and I'm not playing this game. That was the moment it ended. That was the moment you began. Because the real victory was never about getting them to admit what they did. It was about choosing to stop betraying yourself. It was about realizing that you don't need their permission to be whole. That you don't need their validation to walk away. That choosing yourself quietly, completely, is the most radical act of love there is. You are no longer surviving. You are living. You are no longer adjusting your light to fit someone else's shadow. You're standing in your truth, unshaken. And from this point forward, you don't just carry freedom, you embody it. Not because they changed, but because you did. And that is the beginning of everything. Want to hear more of this? Then click on the video on the right-hand side, which is even more shocking.